something I find very true and interesting is that the band never knows what's good or not in a mix. They're too close to it. It's almost impossible for them to know. Do they have an opinion? Sure. Is it the right opinion? That's the beautiful thing about what we do. There's no right or wrong. Give you a great example. Pearl Jam 10. Tim Palmer mixed it. And let me start by saying, I was a young kid in 91 when this thing was released. Sometime thereafter, I'm in my backyard, young kid, 7, 8. I'm on the swings. My older brother is blasting on the boombox, Even Flow. I remember it like it was yesterday. The first note in that song, as soon as you hear that thing, I fell in love with the sound. I could not get enough of that song, of that entire album. I loved it. Now, granted, this was before I knew anything about mixing. All I know is I fell in love with the band instantly. You know how many millions of copies that record sold? That made Pearl Jam's career, okay? Guess what? The band didn't like the mixes. The band decided we want to do this again. So one of my idols wound up mixing it later. And when I first heard that mix, because that came out in 2009, so I'm significantly older when I hear this remixed versions of Even Flow, for example, my first thought was, what am I listening to? That's different. That's interesting, but it's different. I never said, this is so much better than the original. That's not what I said at all. I said, okay, this is different. Now, I can understand from a business perspective why you would want to remix your songs and then release them again, and now people can rebuy the same thing they bought in 91 if they love it that much, and you get to kind of, shake the tree twice. You get to make twice as much off the same amazing songs by doing that. That's a big reason why labels re-release and remaster, and it's always been what they've done. But I find it so interesting that Pearl Jam, who obviously knows up from down. I mean, these guys have had the longevity, the songs, the career to really know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the guys making the decisions in that band knew something. But yet, if left to their own devices, they probably wouldn't have released 10 the way it was mixed, because according to them, nobody liked the mixes. The band didn't like the mixes. But that didn't stop me and everyone else like me from loving that band so much and that album sound, the mixes. Let's just focus loving the mixes so much that we just fell in love and, hook, line, and sinker with that band. So you realize what I'm saying here? What I'm saying is, if a band who clearly knows up from down doesn't really know up from down when it comes to what makes a good or bad mix, all they know is what they like or don't like, and because they're so close to it, their opinion is extremely biased. They want to hear more of what they want and less of what they don't, but it's got nothing to do with an objective reality of, does this sound good enough to get the songs across? And is this sound something that's going to help sell this? Or is this sound hurting it in some way? Some people may argue if it was mixed different, it would have sold more or something, but I don't look at it that way. I look at it like it was mixed exactly as it had to be, because things happen for a reason. Timing is everything. They chose Tim Palmer, who was in England, to mix this thing recorded in Seattle, and it made amazing success. It made their future. Like, it was a successful album. So obviously, the opinions of those within it who didn't like this or that, if they would have listened to those, if they would have mixed it themselves or something, what would have happened? Who knows? There's tons of stories like this. What happens to something like that, in my opinion, is after a certain amount of years, the band has no choice but to pick it apart because it's their album. And every time they hear it, they are personally very close to it. They hear their parts. They hear it differently than we do because it's their baby. So, of course, they want to change this and that, but it doesn't make it better. And I've heard the original and the Brendan mixes, and I am such a Brendan O'Brien fan. And I could honestly tell you that when I hear the newer versions, to me, they just sound like different versions. It doesn't give me the exact nostalgia that I had listening to that original version from 91 and how that sounded. It had a vibe to it. Brendan's is great, but so is Tim Palmer's for what it was. In my opinion, that fits the story of that band in my head, in the way it worked out. It fit, which is why it worked out. Timing, everything coming together for that to work, and it works. This brings also to mind like Butch Vig producing Nevermind and Nirvana not liking it. It doesn't, like, the band is the last people to know what something should sound like in a mix. So many times the band will ruin a mix with their tweaks and their changes. So many times. But let's also say that who knows how much input, Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam, the rest of the band had on the way that mix by Tim Palmer, all those mixes sounded. Who knows how much input they had? In other words, it might have started somewhere and then maybe some tweaks were made by the band, some conversations on the phone, something, meetings, who knows? Back then everybody had to show up for the revisions or not, or it would have to be a thing talked about. Then the console, you get what I'm saying? You're on a console, recalls were not the same. So there was some method in place to get that album done. And the band probably had some input, but who knows exactly how much input, So it's possible that the band's input got it to where it is, where I love it, where everyone else who bought that record loves it, where we all fell in love with Pearl Jam. Like, it's possible they had influence. I'm not saying they didn't. All I'm saying is that combination of their potential influence and how amazing Tim Palmer's mixes were made everyone listen and say, this is amazing. Could it be different? Yes. But that is the perfect thing that you should realize when people want you to change your mix or think something isn't right. This is too loud. This is too low. This should change. Just realize that's no different. It's worse, actually, than even people in the band telling you this should change, that should change. We don't like this. They may not have a clue as to what this thing should sound like in order to get the most out of it. All they know is what their opinion is, which makes what we do so interesting, hard, and so by the grace of by the grace of God, it's like something is allowed to happen. Because if a band gets in the way too much, it's not going to happen. It's not going to go through. They could kill the whole thing. They could decide it ain't good, and maybe it was perfect. Maybe the thing that was mixed was great, and they decided to kill it for some reason because they didn't like whatever, and it would have taken them somewhere huge. Maybe, I mean, nobody. So the point is, as a mixer, you put your creative input in there, and then so many other things have to go right for it to wind up being a success of any kind, even just being released. Like, a lot has to go right. And people have to not get in the way. And at any time, something could happen that makes it all come crashing down. So this is also why building some strength in your inner core of what is, your decision or not, what you prefer or not, what do you like or not, and stand on that. This is your mix. You stand on it. You don't send it out and say, maybe this needs to change or that needs to change, or this is the best I could get this, or don't make excuses. Don't send it out with leading people down the path of this should be different. Don't do that. You send it out. You stand behind it. The best mixers in the world actually say very little when they send things out. They just send them out because they don't have any excuses for what they've done. This is their work. And they're not apologizing for it as it goes out. Andrew Sheps famously says that a lot in a lot of videos. He goes, you can't explain to somebody something before they listen to your record. You're going to go to everyone's house who listens to this thing. If you get lucky enough to get millions of people to hear it, you're going to go to all their houses and apologize first? You're going to tell them whatever? No. So why tell that to the band? You send it out, and then it's your best work, and it's what you stand behind for your decisions of how it should sound. And know that everyone will have a different opinion. Know that the band may all like and want something slightly different, and none of that makes it right. None of it makes it wrong. All it is an opinion. And this is why being a person who's easy to get along with, in a way, is very critical, because you sort of have to assert yourself that this is your opinion, but you can't be a dick about it. You can't be someone who comes in, and makes them not want to work with you by the way you answer them. But at the same time, you must have a strong opinion of what you think. You must stand on that. It's got to be where, in your mind, this is the right answer. Because then they'll get some confidence that you do know what you're thinking and talking about and what your decision is, and maybe they'll allow it to happen. But I also think, and maybe you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, or what you think about this, maybe you think something different, but when record labels were making decisions, there were even more things that had to go on to make things happen. And in other words, like the A&R guy might have had to approve the mixes. The executive, the label needed to approve it, or they scrapped the whole thing. I've heard stories like that where they didn't think there were any songs on it, so they scrapped it, kind of thing. And then the band had to push to get it re-released. There's things like this that happened too, where it was so hard to get through all these channels where something actually came out. And that doesn't make it a better process because of that. A lot of times great things got squelched until the band decided to do something crazy or go on their own or go around them or do something. So what I'm basically saying is, in today's world where it's really every artist is more or less independent until you're on a certain level, it's got to be easier because you have less people to convince, but now the artist has more authoritative control, so to speak, over what is happening because you're dealing directly with the artist in most cases, and they have to like it, which really means they have to have confidence in you. And as soon as they lose their confidence in you, it's very hard to get that back, and most importantly, if you have a vision of how it should sound and it differs from the way they think it should sound, keep in mind that doesn't make you a bad mixer. It doesn't make what you did wrong. It literally just means, just like Pearl Jam, that they didn't like the mixes despite selling millions of copies and having everyone, so many people love that album. Obviously not everyone, but me, I love it. And when I became someone who's involved in mixing and I hear Brendan's version, I can clearly hear the difference, but it doesn't make it better. It really doesn't. I listen to both and I think I prefer the original. I prefer the original in so many ways. So, and that's not to say if I were to mix that album today, I would make it sound like that. It's just to say that was good enough for me that, in my opinion, it should not have been redone. If you take the business side out of it, there's no reason to have redone that. It was super successful. It sounded amazing. And the band still wasn't satisfied. That's like the headline. The band still wasn't satisfied. Bottom line. And that just shows you that even selling millions of copies and breaking into the music business, your career gets made on that album and you still don't think it's good as the artist. Are you kidding? It's just so crazy to me. And I think everyone should realize that. And I love Pearl Jam. I'm a huge Pearl Jam fan. What they did back then, what they still do. I'm a fan of Dark Matter. I like it. And I have to say, there's something to the fact that a band that's been around this long, obviously their opinion means something, but just isn't it interesting that your opinion could mean something and it could still be technically one that, is, I would almost say, is wrong in a way. Your opinion is your opinion, so it's not technically wrong, but the original album did what it was supposed to do. And as a result, you should love it. It should be like, man, this is great. You should be able to appreciate it for what it is. Not, my bass is too low, so it should come up a little. Not, the drums have too much verb on them, so let's do it again with more in-your-face drums. Like, no, to me, it's like, why? Just why? I just don't get it. That sounds so good, but it's the perfect explanation of how nobody agrees on anything when it comes to what an art project should be. Nobody will ever agree. The more people you get, the harder it is to agree. And that's why it's so hard to deal with bands, honestly, because it could be the best sounding thing with selling millions and millions and millions of copies and still the band doesn't like it. It's just such a good example of that, I think. If you have any other examples of this, throw it in the comments, because I'd love to hear this in other, every time I come across a story like this, I find it super interesting. I found it interesting with Nirvana that, but not surprising. You could picture Kurt Cobain thinking something that sounded that polished is too polished. You could picture him wanting it to sound more like ripped jeans in a way. You know what I'm saying? You could picture it wanting more of a punk kind of, guttural type of vibe. I could see that, but, and I guess it's no different with Pearl Jam. I guess it's really not. I could just always see people wanting things to be whatever they are, and that doesn't make them better or worse. And if every chef decided to cook every meal differently depending on what they thought the person was going to like at that table, that chef would be terrible. And as a mixer, if you were going to try to mix it based on what you think the band's going to like and not your opinion of what you like, you're going to be at a huge disservice. You understand? If everyone painted the Mona Lisa, no Mona Lisas would look the same. They'd all look different. Some people would like this one. Some people would like this one. Doesn't make any of them right or wrong. It just means everybody's got opinions. So just realize that and don't get bogged down when people give you their opinion of what's different, what should be and what not should be. Just realize it's just their opinion. And it doesn't make it right. And if it sold millions and thousands, if it literally sold millions of copies, they'd still have their opinion. Oh, it sold all these, but it's not a sonic masterpiece. Yeah, sure, right. In my opinion, it is. It is a sonic masterpiece. Another one that comes to mind, Battle of Los Angeles, Rage Against the Machine. Brendan O'Brien did that, if I'm not mistaken. And I love that album. And the way albums sound when they're all different and weird and not what you're expecting something to totally be like and not the flaws in it make the sound. I'd never listened to that album and said, man, Maria on that album, one of my favorite songs ever. You should check that out. Bass line is phenomenal and the thing is just killer. I listened to that. I'm like, you know what? The guitars are a little loud. But guess what? It makes the song. It's part of it. It makes me love it. That and where the bass is and how much of it I can hear or not and how the drums sit. These things are what makes it. Making those sound totally, every note audible and totally clear and perfect and making it a sonic masterpiece would ruin it. People don't seem to get this. The vibe is all that matters. And no 3-4 people are going to agree on what vibe is better on 6 things. Just like nobody would pick the same outfit if given every piece of clothing in the world. You could do this with anything. You explain you get what I'm saying? So I hope you guys dig it. I feel really strongly about this kind of thing because you'll find it all over when you look at reviews of albums that sold millions of copies and you still get all this kind of stuff. People all over talking about their different opinion. So I find it hilarious. Anyway, you guys got this. Everybody keep that in mind. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Just keep in mind, whatever you're doing, it's probably great already. You got this. Evan Jaffe Custom Cut Studios. You got this. Take it easy.